The air in Devil's Canyon tasted like dust and death. Ethan Cole didn't know it yet, but he was already a dead man. He just hadn't been told. The sun was a wound in the Arizona sky, bleeding all over the sandstone cliffs. He squinted, his hands steady on the reins of his mare as she picked her way through the narrow passage. He had horses to deliver, a job to do. Time was money in this land, and this route, this forbidden shortcut through Apache territory, was supposed to save him time. The old-timers at Fort Grant had warned him. They'd shaken their heads, their faces grim. That's Apache land, son. They don't take kindly to trespassers. But Ethan had ridden these trails for 5 years. 5 years without so much as seeing a shadow. He figured the stories were just that. Stories. He was wrong. The mare's ears shot forward. Her body went rigid beneath him. Ethan's hand moved, a blur of instinct, toward the Winchester rifle in its scabbard. But he was too slow. A lifetime too slow. They didn't come from the rocks. They were the rocks. One moment, there was nothing but stone and shadow. The next, they were there. 3 Apache warriors, their faces a nightmare of black and white paint, dropping onto the trail like ghosts. His horse screamed, rearing up, and in that split second of chaos, the world turned upside down. Hands, strong as iron, ripped him from the saddle. He hit the ground hard, the air exploding from his lungs. Stars danced behind his eyes. When his vision cleared, he was staring up the barrel of a cavalry carbine, a weapon that had probably belonged to a soldier who wasn't so lucky. The warrior holding it was just a boy, maybe 16, but his eyes were ancient with a hatred that turned Ethan's blood to ice. This was it. This was how it ended. But then a voice cut through the tension, low and sharp, commanding. Wait. The young warrior's finger froze on the trigger. Footsteps crunched on the sandy earth behind Ethan. He turned his head, every muscle screaming, and his breath caught in his throat. She moved like smoke in the dying light. She wasn't painted for war like the others. Her deerskin dress was covered in beadwork that shimmered like captured starlight. A knife with a blade that drank the last rays of sun hung at her hip. But it was her face that stopped him cold. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes. Eyes as dark and deep as the desert night itself. He saw the warriors speak to her, their voices urgent, gesturing at him with their weapons. She didn't even look at them. She just raised a single hand, and they fell silent. Absolute authority. She knelt beside him, a fluid motion of impossible grace. He could smell the sage and wood smoke that clung to her hair. He could see the thin white scar that traced her jawline, a story he knew he'd never hear. And then she spoke, her English accented but clear as a bell. You are the one they call Horse Whisperer. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A fact. Ethan's mind reeled. How could she possibly know that? He nodded slowly, his throat as dry as the canyon floor. He'd earned that name, built a reputation for gentling horses no one else could touch. Your horses passed through our lands 2 moons ago, she said, her eyes boring into him, seeing things he didn't even know were there. You helped the son of Rising Star. His pony went lame. You gave him one of your own. The memory was foggy, a small Apache boy, maybe 12, stranded on the trail. His horse was in bad shape. Ethan had done what any decent man would do. He'd given the boy a spare mount and sent him on his way. A simple kindness. He hadn't thought about it since. The boy remembered you, she said, and for a heartbeat, her expression softened. And then faster than a snake strike, her hand moved. Cold steel pressed against his throat. The world stopped. His pulse hammered against the blade. The warriors behind her shifted, eager, but her eyes never left his. They were locked on him, and he saw something in their depths. Tiny flecks of gold. He could feel her breath on his skin. She leaned in, her lips almost brushing his ear, and she whispered 5 words that froze the very marrow in his bones. I know who you are. The knife was gone as quickly as it had appeared, leaving a thin line of blood in its wake. She stood up, a single, seamless motion. She barked a command at her warriors. They argued, their voices sharp and angry. Ethan didn't need to speak Apache to know they were demanding his death, but she was the one in charge. Her word was law. After a tense, silent standoff, They backed away, their hatred still simmering in their eyes. "Stand up, horse whisperer," she commanded. Ethan got to his feet, his legs shaky. He was a head taller than her, but in that moment, he felt like a child. She circled him, her movements like a mountain cat studying its prey. Her gaze took in every detail. His worn chaps, his Colt revolver, his silver spurs. "You carry yourself like a warrior," she observed, "but your eyes, they are soft. Too soft for this land." "I'm just trying to make a living," Ethan managed, his voice hoarse. She laughed, a sound with no warmth, sharp and cold as her knife. "Honest? Is it honest when your people steal our land, poison our water, slaughter the buffalo until the plains are silent?" He had no answer. He'd seen it himself. The slow, creeping death of the world he'd once known. He wasn't proud of it, but he wasn't responsible for it either. At least that's what he told himself. She seemed to read his thoughts. "You think because you show kindness to one Apache boy, it washes your hands of the rest? You still ride through our sacred places? You still serve the men who want to see us wiped from the earth? Then why did you spare me?" The words tumbled out before he could stop them. She stepped close again. So close he could count the elk teeth sewn into her dress, see the intricate tattoos that snaked along her arms. When she smiled this time, it was all predator. "Because you have a debt to pay, Ethan Cole, and I always collect what I am owed." Hearing his own name on her lips sent a shiver down his spine. How much did she know about him? Who was this woman? "Take him," she ordered the warriors. "He rides with us." Rough hands grabbed him, binding his wrist with rawhide that bit into his skin. They took his guns, his boots, his hat, everything. As they shoved him toward a waiting horse, she approached him one last time. She was holding something, a single perfect eagle feather. She tucked it into his shirt pocket, her fingers brushing against his chest. The touch was like a brand. "So my people will know you are under my protection," she said, her voice low. "Without this, they would have your scalp before sunrise." She paused, her eyes locking with his, holding a universe of threats and promises. "With it? What do you want from me?" he asked, the question raw with desperation. She was already on her own horse, her dark hair a river of midnight against the twilight sky. She looked down at him, and for a flicker of a second, he saw something else behind the warrior's mask. A weariness. A burden too heavy for someone so young. "That," she said, her voice carrying on the wind as she wheeled her horse around, "remains to be seen. Perhaps you will be useful. Perhaps you will prove me wrong about your people." She spurred her horse forward, calling over her shoulder, her voice laced with a chilling amusement. "Or perhaps you will simply learn what it means to beg." They rode into the darkness. His own horses were left scattered and forgotten. The stars began to pop out in the velvet sky, and with every hoofbeat, her words echoed in his head. "You'll beg for me every night after." He'd survived, but as they rode deeper and deeper into the heart of Apache territory, Ethan Cole knew with a bone-deep certainty that his life would never be the same. He was a pawn in a game he didn't understand, played by a woman who had spared him with one breath and condemned him with the next. He wondered if he'd been shown mercy, or if he'd just been handed a much, much slower death sentence. The moon rose full and white, and it lit up her profile as she rode ahead of him. And even though he was a prisoner, even though he was terrified, he couldn't look away. She had marked him, not just with the cut on his throat or the feather in his pocket. She had marked his very soul, and he had no idea what she planned to do with it. The Apache camp appeared out of the darkness, like a secret whispered on the wind. It was tucked away in a box canyon, hidden from the world by towering cliffs of red rock. Dozens of cook fires burned like fallen stars, and the air was thick with the smells of roasting meat, wood smoke, and a life he couldn't comprehend. He heard children laughing, dogs barking. It was a town, just like any other, a community living and breathing in the heart of the wilderness. Except here, he was the monster. Word of his arrival spread like a brush fire. Faces appeared in the doorways of the wickiups, the traditional Apache dwellings. Warriors, their expressions hard as stone, emerged from the shadows. Women stopped their work to stare, their eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and curiosity. Children scattered, hiding behind their mother's skirts. Every single eye was on him, the white man, bound, bootless, and marked by an eagle feather he didn't understand. They stopped in front of the largest dwelling, one decorated with painted symbols of power and history. An old man emerged. His hair was long and silver, braided with beads and feathers. His face was a roadmap of time, etched with the joys and sorrows of 1,000 seasons. Ethan recognized him instantly from the wanted posters in Fort Grant. Chief Joseph Crow Feather. The Army said he was the most dangerous Apache leader left alive. The woman, his captor, dismounted and approached the chief, her father. She spoke to him in rapid Apache, her tone filled with a deep respect. Ethan heard his own name spoken, and he saw the chief's eyes narrow, studying him with an unnerving intensity. The old man's gaze lingered on the eagle feather, then on the thin red line on Ethan's throat. "So," the chief said, his English as perfect as his daughter's, "you are the one who helped the son of Rising Star." "I gave him a horse," Ethan said, choosing his words carefully. "That's all." "That's all?" The chief began to circle him, just as his daughter had. "A horse in this land can be the difference between life and death. The boy made it home to his mother because of you. She speaks your name in her prayers every morning." "Then why?" Ethan started, but a warrior jabbed him hard in the ribs with the butt of a spear, silencing him. The chief held up a hand. "Let him speak." Ethan took a ragged breath. "Then why am I your prisoner?" "Because," Chief Crowfeather said, his voice as ancient as the rocks around them, "one kindness does not erase a century of crimes. It does not bring back our dead. It does not restore our sacred lands. But," he paused, his dark eyes locking onto Ethan's, "it does make you interesting." A crowd was gathering now, pressing in, their faces a sea of anger and suspicion. An old woman spat on the ground at his feet. A young mother clutched her baby tight, as if his very presence was a disease. A warrior, powerfully built and covered in scars, pushed his way to the front. He was about Ethan's age, and his eyes burned with a pure, undiluted hatred. He began speaking harshly to the chief, pointing at Ethan as if he were a piece of trash. "Grey Wolf says we should kill you now," the woman translated, moving to stand beside Ethan. Her name, he realized. He still didn't know her name. "He says white men bring only lies and death. He says keeping you alive puts our people at risk." "Maybe he's right," Ethan said quietly. She shot him a sharp look, her eyes flashing. "You would give up so easily?" "I'm not giving up. I'm being a realist. Your people have every right to hate me." She let out that same cold, humorless laugh he'd heard in the canyon. "Hate? Hate is too small a word for what we feel. But my father is chief for a reason. He sees things others do not. He sees beyond today." Chief Crow Feather raised his staff, and a profound silence fell over the camp. He spoke, his voice ringing with an authority that seemed to echo from the canyon walls. Ethan didn't understand the words, but he felt their power. He saw the effect they had on the crowd. They weren't happy, but they were listening. "My father says you will live," she translated, her voice flat. "For now, but you will have to earn that life. Tomorrow our riders go to Fort Grant. They carry a message for your Colonel Morrison. You will be that message." "What message?" Ethan asked. "That is not for you to know. Not yet." Grey Wolf exploded in protest, and others joined him. The argument became a storm of angry voices and threatening gestures. Through it all, the old chief stood unmoving, his face a mask of calm. Finally, he spoke one word, a word that cut through the chaos like a knife. "Enough!" He turned to his daughter. "Ayoka," he said, and finally Ethan had her name, Ayoka. "You will be responsible for the white man. His life is now tied to yours. If he runs, if he betrays us, you will pay the price beside him." Ethan saw a flicker of shock, maybe even fear in Ayoka's eyes, but it was gone in an instant. She bowed her head to her father. "As you wish, father." The crowd began to break up, but the dark looks and muttered threats continued. Grey Wolf shouldered past Ethan, slamming into him hard enough to make him stumble. The hatred in his eyes needed no translation. "Come," Ayoka said. She used her knife to cut the bonds on his wrists. "You will need food and water. Tomorrow. Tomorrow will be difficult." She led him to a smaller wickiup at the edge of the camp. Inside, a small fire burned, and the air was filled with that same scent of sage and smoke that he now associated with her. She gave him a gourd of water and some dried meat and flatbread. "This is your wickiup," he stated, looking around. "Yes," she said. "Why would you trust me to stay here? In your home?" She sat across the fire from him, her dark eyes reflecting the flames. "Trust. Do not mistake necessity for trust, white man. My warriors are outside. The desert will kill you if you run. That feather is the only thing keeping you alive in this camp, and you cannot betray our message until you know what it is." "So why me? Why not just send one of your own warriors?" Ayoka stared into the fire, her expression unreadable. "My father is old," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He has fought your people his entire life. He has seen our lands shrink, our people starve, our children stolen and sent to your schools to have the Apache beaten out of them. But he also sees the truth. We cannot fight forever. Your numbers are endless. Your weapons, your hunger for this land. It is a flood that will drown us all." "He wants peace," Ethan realized. "He wants survival," she snapped back. "Peace is a word for men who have full bellies and warm homes. We have neither. But he believes there may be another path, a path between all-out war and total surrender. And he thinks I'm part of that path? He thinks you might be. Or you might be just another white man full of empty promises. He is taking a great risk, Ethan Cole, and he has tied my life to that risk." She stood up abruptly. "Sleep. Tomorrow you will face the council. They will test your body. They will test your spirit. And they will test your truth. Many of them will be hoping you fail." "Including you?" he asked. She paused at the entrance, a silhouette against the starry night. "What I hope for does not matter, but understand this. If you run, I am shamed. If you betray us, I die. Grey Wolf and others would see us both dead right now, rather than place a single ounce of faith in a white man." "I didn't ask for this," he said, the weight of it all crashing down on him. "No," she agreed, her voice softer now. "But you carry it. That is what it means to be caught between two worlds, to pay for debts you did not create." She started to leave, then turned back one last time. "Tell me, Horse Whisperer, that day you gave the horse to the son of Rising Star. What did you think would happen because of it?" Ethan thought for a moment. "Nothing," he said honestly. "I just saw a kid who needed help." "Nothing," she repeated, the word hanging in the air between them. "Such a small word for an action that has now put the fate of my people in your hands. Sleep well, white man. Tomorrow you will learn that in our world, nothing is ever just nothing." She was gone. He was alone with the fire and the swirling vortex of his thoughts. Outside, he could hear the sounds of the camp settling down for the night. A mother singing to her child, men talking in low voices, the distant howl of a coyote. They weren't savages. They were people. People pushed to the very edge, fighting for their existence. And a simple act of kindness, a gesture he'd forgotten minutes after he'd made it, had thrown him right into the middle of their struggle. Tomorrow he would face their tests. Tomorrow his old life would feel a million miles away. But tonight, for the first time in his life, Ethan Cole closed his eyes and dreamed of a woman with eyes like the midnight sky, whispering threats that sounded an awful lot like promises. The sun rose like a hammer blow, turning the red rocks into the walls of an oven. Ethan stood in the center of the camp, stripped to the waist, the merciless heat already searing his pale skin. The entire band had formed a circle around him. It felt less like an audience and more like a ring of predators waiting for him to stumble. Grey Wolf was in his element, strutting back and forth, mocking him in Apache, drawing roars of laughter from the crowd. "He says you are soft," Ioka translated. She stood beside her father, dressed for battle today in leather leggings and a warrior's shirt. Her hair was pulled back tight. "He says white men are like dough, made of comfort and quick to spoil in the sun." "He might have a point," Ethan muttered, sweat already stinging his eyes. Then you will die today, she replied, her voice completely flat. These tests are not for the soft. Chief Crow Feather raised his staff. Silence. He spoke, his voice calm and measured, and warriors began to move, clearing a path to the base of the towering canyon wall. The first test is the climb, Ayoka announced. Her voice carried, clear and cold. She pointed to a tiny ledge, impossibly high up the sheer cliff face. You will climb to the eagle's nest. You will bring back a feather. You have until the sun is at its peak. If you fall, she shrugged, then my father's mercy was wasted on you. They pushed him toward the cliff. The ground was sharp and rocky against his bare feet. He could hear the warriors making bets on how high he'd get before he plunged to his death. He looked up. It was at least 200 feet of vertical sandstone, baked by 1,000 years of sun. The handholds were few and far between. He started to climb. The first 20 feet weren't so bad. The rock was still cool from the night, but the higher he went, the hotter it became. The sun was a physical weight on his back, and the rock face turned into a griddle. His fingers started to blister. His muscles screamed in protest. 50 feet up, a piece of rock crumbled under his hand. For one terrifying, heart-stopping moment, he dangled by one arm, his feet scrambling for a hold, the ground a dizzying distance below. The crowd went silent. He could feel Ayoka's eyes on him. He gritted his teeth, found a new hold, and kept going. His world shrank to the few inches of rock in front of his face. The next handhold, the next foothold. That's all that mattered. 100 feet up, a rattlesnake coiled on a ledge forced him to make a dangerous sideways traverse, wasting precious time and energy. His vision started to blur. His lungs burned. But he kept going. Then somehow he was there. He collapsed onto the narrow ledge, his body trembling. The nest was empty except for a few scattered bones and feathers. He grabbed the longest, purest white feather he could find and tucked it into his waistband. The journey down was even worse. His strength was gone. His blistered hands could barely grip the scorching rock. Twice he slipped, his life saved only by a desperate lunge. When his feet finally touched the ground, his legs gave out, and he dropped to his knees, gasping for air. The crowd murmured, some with shock, some with a grudging respect. Grey Wolf looked like he'd just swallowed poison. An old woman, her face a mask of wrinkles, came forward and offered him a gourd of water. It was the sweetest thing he'd ever tasted. The second test, Ayoka announced, giving him no time to recover, is endurance. They dragged him to a post in the center of the camp and tied his hands, stretching his arms wide. The sun was at its highest point now, a malevolent eye in a bleached white sky. There was no shade, no relief. You will stand here until the sun sets, Ayoka explained. If you fall, if you beg for release, you have failed. Grey Wolf approached, a leather whip in his hand. He said something in Apache, and the warriors around him laughed, a dark, ugly sound. He will make sure you do not fall asleep, Ayoka translated. The first lash was a shock. The second was fire. Grey Wolf was an artist of pain, never striking the same place twice, spreading the agony across Ethan's back, his shoulders, his ribs. Time dissolved into a blur of heat and pain. His shoulders screamed. His throat felt like it was coated in sand. His tongue was a swollen, useless thing in his mouth. Through the haze, he watched Ayoka. She stood in the shade of her father's wickiup, perfectly still, her face impossible to read. But he knew she was watching every flicker of pain, every grimace. Children came to stare, their eyes wide with a morbid curiosity. Some threw pebbles at him. As the afternoon dragged on, he started to hallucinate. The ropes felt like snakes. He saw his dead mother in the crowd, her face filled with sorrow. And then, through the shimmering heat, he heard a sound. Singing. It was the old woman who had given him water. Her voice was thin but clear, an ancient melody that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The rhythm matched his heartbeat, giving him something to hold on to. One by one, other voices joined hers. Not everyone. Grey Wolf and his followers were silent, but enough. A web of sound that held him up when his body was ready to collapse. The sun finally kissed the western cliffs. It was over. Someone cut the ropes, and Ethan fell to the ground, a useless heap of pain. Gentle hands lifted him. He looked up into the kind eyes of a middle-aged woman. "I am Singing Bird," she said. "I am the mother of Rising Star's son. You saved my boy." She and the other women tended to his wounds, their touch firm, but not unkind. They cleaned the lashes on his back and put a cool salve on his blistered hands. He was still the enemy, but he had earned something, a sliver of respect. "The final test is at dawn," Ayoka told him later, back in her wiki-up. Food had been brought for him, venison stew. It was the best meal of his life. "What is it?" he asked, his voice a raw croak. For the first time, he saw the corner of her mouth twitch. It was almost a smile. "Truth," she said, "the hardest test of all." She watched him eat, her expression thoughtful. "Why?" he asked suddenly. "Why did you watch me all day?" She stirred the fire with a stick. "My father sees a possibility. Grey Wolf sees a threat. I am trying to see the man." "And what do you see?" "I see someone caught between two worlds," she said softly. "Just like me. You are white, but you gave your horse to an Apache boy. You understand the spirit of a horse, yet you serve men who would break the spirit of my people. You suffer Grey Wolf's hatred without calling for revenge. You are unexpected. Is that a good thing? We will see." She looked directly at him, and those golden flecks in her eyes seemed to dance in the firelight. "Now you tell me, Ethan Cole, what do you see when you look at me?" The question stunned him. He saw a warrior, a leader, a daughter, a woman carrying the weight of a dying nation on her shoulders. He saw strength, and he saw pain. "I see someone who whispers threats that sound like promises," he said, the words coming from a place he didn't know existed. "I see someone who holds a knife to my throat one moment and makes sure I have food the next. I see strength trying to pretend it doesn't know mercy." She was silent for a long time. Then she stood. "Sleep. Tomorrow's test will decide if you carry our message or if you feed the vultures." She paused at the entrance. "You did well today. Better than many Apache boys on their first trial." "Grey Wolf doesn't think so. Grey Wolf sees only what is. My father sees what could be. That is why one is a chief and the other is not." She glanced back at him, her silhouette framed by the stars. "Which one are you, Ethan Cole? Do you see only the world as it is? Or do you see the world as it could be?" Before he could answer, she was gone. He was left with questions that hurt more than any of Grey Wolf's lashes. Tomorrow would bring the final test, the test of truth. And for the first time, Ethan was afraid. Not of pain, not of death. He was afraid of the truth he might find within himself. The gates of Fort Grant felt like the jaws of a trap. After 3 days in the Apache camp, the sight of the American flag should have been a relief. Instead, Ethan's stomach was a knot of dread. The message he carried, the one they'd finally given him after a grueling interrogation by the Council of Elders, was a fragile seed of peace in a land that only understood war. "Halt! Who goes there?" The sentry's voice was young, nervous. "Ethan Cole, horse trader. I have an urgent message for Colonel Morrison." The gates creaked open. The fort was a hive of activity. Soldiers drilling, the blacksmith's hammer ringing, the familiar sounds of a world he no longer felt a part of. "Cole!" Lieutenant Haskins hurried toward him, his face a mask of shock and suspicion. "My God, we thought you were dead. Your horses wandered back 3 days ago." "Apache," Ethan said simply. "I need to see the colonel. Now." Haskins's eyes narrowed, taking in Ethan's torn shirt, the healing welts on his back, the eagle feather still tucked in his pocket. "The Apache, and they let you go?" "They sent me," Ethan corrected. "I have a message from Chief Crow Feather." The words spread through the fort like a lit fuse. Soldiers stopped what they were doing to stare. By the time Haskins led him to the headquarters, a crowd was following. Colonel James Morrison was a man carved from granite and hard-won experience. He sat behind his desk, his gray beard neatly trimmed, his eyes missing nothing. Standing beside him was Captain Samuel Mercer, a man whose ambition was a palpable force in the room. His eyes were sharp, cold, and cruel. "Mr. Cole," the colonel said, his voice a low rumble, "I hear you've had an interesting few days." I was taken prisoner, sir, Ethan began. Prisoner? Mercer scoffed, his voice dripping with contempt. You look remarkably healthy for a man who's been in the hands of savages. All your fingers seem to be attached. Ignoring him, Ethan relayed Chief Crow Feather's message, word for word. The Apache asked for a council. 1 moon from today at Shepherd's Spring. 5 from each side. No weapons but knives. To speak of boundaries, water rights, peace. He paused, then delivered the final part. But if they see treachery, if soldiers come in force, the war will not end until the last Apache is dead or the last white man has fled this land. The silence in the room was deafening. Preposterous, Mercer finally exploded. It's a trap. They send this sympathizer back with pretty words while they gather their warriors for an ambush. With only 5 men? Morrison asked calmly. 5 men can signal 500 hidden in the rocks, Mercer shot back. Sir, we cannot trust the word of a savage, especially when it's delivered by a man who has clearly been compromised. Compromised? Ethan's temper flared. I nearly died passing their tests. I'm here because I gave my word. The fact that you're alive at all is what's suspicious, Mercer sneered. The Apache don't take prisoners, not unless a deal was made. What information did you trade for your life, Cole? That's enough, Captain, Morrison said, his voice sharp. He turned to Ethan. You have to understand how this looks, Mr. Cole. The Apache have been raiding for months. Now suddenly they want to talk? Their people are starving, Colonel, Ethan said, his voice low. Their hunting grounds are gone. The buffalo are gone. This isn't a trick. It's desperation. Crow Feather is trying to save what's left of his people. Listen to him, Mercer said, his face red with fury. He speaks for them. Sir, I demand this man be arrested as a traitor. Then what about this? Mercer's fingers stabbed toward Ethan's chest. The feather. That's an Apache protection marker. They gave him safe passage. Why would they do that for a random captive unless he was already one of them? Ethan's hand instinctively went to the feather. He remembered Ayoka's fingers brushing his chest as she placed it there. It was so I could deliver the message without being killed by other bands, he explained. A likely story, Mercer spat. Morrison stood and walked to the window, his back to the room. Mr. Cole, have you had prior dealings with the Apache? Ethan hesitated. He knew the truth would be twisted, used against him, but he couldn't lie. Once, months ago, I gave a horse to an Apache boy whose own had gone lame. Mercer pounced. Aiding the enemy. That's a crime. That horse was probably used on a raid that killed American citizens. He was a 12-year-old boy stranded in the desert, Ethan shot back. What was I supposed to do? Let him die? Yes. Mercer slammed his fist on the desk. Every Apache child grows up to be a killer. Gentlemen, Morrison's voice cut through the anger. He turned back, his face grim. The question is, do we go to this council? It's a trap, sir, Mercer insisted. Let me take a company to Shepherd's Spring. We can end this threat for good. And if it isn't a trap, Morrison countered, if it's a genuine offer? Washington is tired of this war, Captain. They want results, not a bigger body count. He looked at Ethan, his expression unreadable. You've delivered your message, Mr. Cole. You are not under arrest, for now, but you will remain in the fort. Sergeant Donnelly will show you to your quarters. Outside, Ethan was immediately surrounded by soldiers. Some looked at him with suspicion, others with awe. Then a hard-faced corporal named Watson shoved his way through. Apache lover, he growled, and spat in the dust at Ethan's feet. My brother was killed at Willow Creek, butchered by your people. Before Ethan could react, Watson's fist connected with his jaw. He went down hard, the taste of blood in his mouth. Soldiers pulled them apart. As he was being helped up, he saw a woman standing by the laundry, a half-Apache woman named Lydia Sullivan. Their eyes met, and in her gaze he saw a flicker of understanding. She knew what it was like to be caught between two worlds. They put him in a small, windowless storage room with a cot. As he sat there, his jaw throbbing, he wondered if he'd made a catastrophic mistake. He had tried to be a bridge, but it seemed all he'd done was give both sides a target to shoot at. He pulled out the eagle feather, Such a small thing to carry so much weight, protection, accusation, hope. He thought of Ioka. Was she watching the same sunset? Did she have any idea the storm her message had unleashed? He had delivered the message, but he was beginning to realize that the message itself might have been the first casualty of the war. The steam from the laundry tubs rose around Lydia Sullivan like a ghost. She was a woman who lived in the margins, half Apache, half Irish, belonging fully to neither world. Her position as the fort's laundress made her invisible, and invisible people hear things. "They're calling you the Apache's pet," she said without looking up as Ethan approached 2 days later. He'd been confined to his room, a prisoner in all but name. "I've been called worse," he said, sitting on a nearby crate. She finally looked at him, her green eyes, a legacy from her Irish father, sharp and intelligent. "My mother was Chiricahua. I know an Apache marker when I see one. Tell me about the woman who gave it to you." The question caught him off guard. "Her name is Ayoka. She's the chief's daughter." "Ayoka," Lydia repeated, the name a soft melody on her tongue. "She who brings joy? An ironic name for a warrior." She wrung out a heavy wool uniform. "Is she beautiful?" "Yes," Ethan admitted, the word escaping before he could stop it. Lydia smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "It always starts there, doesn't it? A spark across the battle lines. The rest, the duty, the honor, the betrayal, that all comes later." She paused, her expression turning serious. "You need to be careful, Ethan. Captain Mercer is a snake. He's been sending riders out, asking questions about you. He is building a case. He wants you hanged as a traitor." "All I did was deliver a message of peace." Lydia laughed, a bitter sound. "You naive man. Peace is bad for business. Mercer has built his career on this war. A treaty would rob him of his chance to be a hero. He will burn the world down before he lets that happen." As if on cue, a rider galloped through the main gate, his horse lathered in sweat. "Colonel, Apache riders spotted. A war party, maybe 20 strong, moving toward Shepherd's Spring." Mercer was at Morrison's side in an instant, his face alight with a dark triumph. "You see, sir, I told you. They were positioning for an ambush all along. We have to strike first." "It could be a hunting party," Morrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Sir, we can't take that chance," Mercer insisted. The fort was buzzing with alarm. Soldiers were grabbing rifles, running to the walls. War was in the air. Later that evening, Morrison summoned Ethan to his office. The old colonel looked tired, the weight of his command pressing down on him. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey. "Tell me the truth, Cole. Do you believe Crow Feather is sincere?" "I believe he's a father trying to save his children, sir, in any way he can." "And his daughter, Ayoka?" Ethan chose his words carefully. "She follows her father, but she doesn't trust us, and I can't say I blame her." Morrison took a long drink of his whiskey. "I'm going to the council, Cole. Against my better judgment, against the advice of every officer here, I'm going to meet him." He fixed Ethan with a hard stare. "And I want you to come with me." "Me, sir? I'm not a soldier." "Exactly. You're the only man alive who has stood in both camps. Your presence might be the only thing that keeps guns from being drawn." He sighed, a sound heavy with weariness. "And if it's a trap, well, then you'll die right alongside us. Some here would call that justice." Ethan walked the fort's perimeter that night, the weight of the colonel's decision settling on him. He was walking back into the lion's den, but this time he wasn't a prisoner. He was a symbol of a peace that felt more fragile than a spider's web. He found himself at the small cemetery just outside the walls, a lonely collection of wooden crosses. "My brother is buried there." Corporal Watson, the man who'd punched him, was standing by one of the graves. His usual anger was gone, replaced by a raw, hollow grief. "Apache got him at Willow Creek. They didn't leave much." He looked at Ethan, his eyes pleading. "Are you sure about this, Cole? Are you sure they're not just leading you into another trap?" "I don't know," Ethan answered honestly. "I just know that if we don't try, the killing will never stop. More graves will just be filled, on both sides." Watson nodded slowly. "Maybe, but if you're wrong, their blood is on your hands." The words followed Ethan back into the fort. He looked up at the mountains, dark and menacing against the night sky. Ayoka was out there. Was she preparing for peace? Or was she sharpening her knife, preparing for war? Her whispered words from the canyon came back to him. You'll beg for me every night after. He was beginning to understand what she meant. He was caught in her orbit, pulled by forces of duty, hope, and something else. Something he didn't dare put a name to. In 5 days, they would ride to Shepherd's Spring. In 5 days, he would find out if he was a peacemaker, or just another fool destined for a shallow grave in the desert. The morning of the council, Ayoka appeared at the gates of Fort Grant. She rode under a white flag of truce, flanked by 2 warriors, her expression as hard and unyielding as the mountains behind her. The entire fort came to a standstill. Soldiers lined the walls, their rifles ready, a current of fear and hatred crackling in the air. Colonel Morrison rode out to meet her, with Ethan at his side. I am Ayoka, daughter of Chief Crow Feather, she announced, her voice ringing with authority. I come to confirm your intentions. Do you come to Shepherd's Spring in good faith? I have given my word, Morrison said. Her eyes, dark and piercing, found Ethan. And you bring the Horse Whisperer, a man who wears our feather but sleeps in our enemy's fort. Mr. Cole is here as a sign of my good faith, Morrison replied. Trust, Ayoka said, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. It is a fragile thing. We have heard your people's words before. They are carried away by the wind. She looked back at the fort, at the rows of soldiers on the walls, at Captain Mercer, whose hatred was a visible aura around him. 3 days, Colonel, at Shepherd's Spring. Come with an honest heart, or do not come at all. As she turned to leave, Morrison called out, Why did you risk coming here yourself? Ayoka paused, looking back over her shoulder. For a moment, the warrior's mask slipped, and Ethan saw the immense weight she carried. I wanted to see the face of the man my father is betting our future on, she said. Her gaze flickered to Ethan one last time, and to see if the man he spared still had a soul. Then she was gone, a phantom riding back into the wilderness. That night, Colonel Morrison confided in Ethan. The old soldier was dying. Cancer. He had months, maybe a year. This council, he said, his voice raspy in the dark. This is my last chance, Cole. My last chance to leave behind something other than a trail of bodies, to do one good thing before the end. The words struck Ethan with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't about politics or strategy anymore. It was about one man's final, desperate attempt at redemption. And he had placed that hope squarely on Ethan's shoulders. The 3 days passed in a blur of tension. The air in the fort was thick with it. Mercer made no secret of his disapproval, his contempt for the colonel's plan. He saw it as weakness, a betrayal of every soldier who had ever died at the hands of the Apache. Finally, the morning came, blood red and ominous. Morrison, Ethan, Lieutenant Haskins, Sergeant Donnelly, and a scout named Hawkins. 5 men riding out from the fort. Mercer watched them go, and the look on his face was not one of concern. It was one of cold, calculating patience, as if he were waiting for something. Shepherd's Spring was an oasis, a patch of green and life in the middle of a dead land. As agreed, they left their rifles with their horses and walked toward the spring, carrying only knives. They were already there. Chief Crow Feather, Ayoka, Grey Wolf, and 2 other warriors. They too were armed only with knives. The 2 groups met, a circle of bitter enemies around the life-giving water. You have come, Crow Feather said. This is a good start. We are here to listen, Morrison replied. The chief spoke of his people's suffering, of the broken treaties, the stolen land, the slow starvation. He proposed boundaries, the mountains for the Apache, the valleys for the settlers, a sharing of the water. It was a reasonable offer, a desperate one. The settlers will never agree, Haskins said. Your people want everything, Grey Wolf snarled. That is the white man's way, to take until there is nothing left. The tension was a living thing, coiling around them. Ethan's eyes kept finding Ayoka's. Her face was a stone mask, but he could feel the conflict raging inside her, the hope warring with a lifetime of distrust. And that's when the first shot rang out. Gunfire exploded from the ridgeline above them. It was an ambush. Bullets tore through the air, kicking up dust and stone. Treachery! Grey Wolf roared, his hand reaching for a knife that was useless against rifles. It's not us! Morrison yelled, diving for cover. But it was. Ethan saw them, the blue uniforms of U.S. cavalry, positioned on the rocks, and leading them, Captain Mercer. Mercer! Ethan screamed. It's a trap! He followed us! Ayoka was beside him, pressed against a boulder, her breath hot on his cheek. Your people betray even your own, she hissed, her voice filled with a terrible final understanding. Surrender, Apache! Mercer's voice boomed from the ridge. You are surrounded. Cease fire, Captain! Morrison roared, standing up, exposing himself to the gunfire. That's an order. They were reaching for weapons, Colonel, Mercer yelled back, a lie so blatant it was obscene. I saw hostile movement. You are relieved of command. In that moment of chaos, Ayoka moved. Her knife was a silver blur in her hand. It flew through the air, aimed straight for Mercer's throat. He jerked back at the last second, and the blade sliced open his shoulder instead. Kill them! Mercer shrieked, clutching his bleeding arm. Kill them all! Hell erupted. Rifles cracked from all sides. Ethan tackled Ayoka, shielding her with his body as bullets ripped into the ground around them. He felt a searing pain in his back. Then another. He saw Colonel Morrison go down, a red stain spreading on his chest. He saw Chief Crow Feather, standing tall and defiant in the open, chanting a death song as bullets slammed into him, until he finally crumpled to the ground, his blood turning the clear water of the spring crimson. Father! Ayoka's scream was a sound of pure agony, a sound that would haunt Ethan's nightmares for the rest of his life. He tried to hold her down, to keep her from getting killed, but she fought with the strength of a cornered animal. The world spun, the sound of gunfire mixing with her cries. Then a final, crushing blow to the back of his head, and everything went black. He woke up slumped over a saddle, his hands tied, every movement sending a wave of agony through his body. They were riding back to the fort. Mercer, his arm in a sling, was in the lead. Morrison was barely alive, held in his saddle by Sergeant Donnelly. Of the Apache, only Ayoka had been taken alive. She was bound on another horse, her face stained with tears and dirt, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was terrifying. The colonel was tragically killed by the Apache during a peace council they betrayed, Mercer was saying to Haskins, loud enough for everyone to hear. He was already writing his report, crafting his lies. A sad day, but it proves once and for all that the only good Apache is a dead Apache. He had won. He had gotten his war. He had murdered a chief under a flag of truce, slaughtered men who had come in peace, and he was going to be hailed as a hero for it. As they rode, Ethan could hear Ayoka singing softly in Apache. It wasn't a song of grief. It was a song of vengeance, a promise of blood for blood. He looked at the eagle feather, still in his pocket, now spattered with his own blood in the dust of betrayal. It had been a symbol of hope. Now it was just a reminder of how foolish that hope had been. The new war had begun, and they were all caught in the fire. The territory exploded. Just as Morrison had predicted in his dying breaths, the murder of Chief Crow Feather united the Apache tribes in a firestorm of vengeance. Ranches burned, stagecoaches were ambushed. The war Mercer had wanted was here, and it was more brutal than anyone could have imagined. Back at Fort Grant, Mercer was a king. His official report painted a heroic picture, a surprise Apache attack, a valiant defense, the tragic loss of Colonel Morrison. Ethan and the other survivors were ordered to keep silent, their own testimonies dismissed as the confused ramblings of men suffering from trauma. To speak the truth was to be branded a traitor. Ethan recovered in a forgotten corner of the fort, his wounds tended to by Lydia. He was a pariah, a ghost haunting the edges of the place he'd once called a sanctuary. She's gone, Lydia told him one morning, her voice a low whisper. Ayoka. She killed 2 guards with her bare hands and vanished into the night. A small, fierce smile touched her lips. Mercer has put a $500 bounty on her head. Every lowlife from here to the Mexican border is out looking for her. Relief washed over Ethan, so potent it made him dizzy. She was free. She was alive. That was all that mattered. But he knew it wasn't over. One night she came for him. The moon was a sliver in the sky, and the fort was on high alert. But she moved through the shadows like she was one of them. One moment he was asleep, the next she was standing at the foot of his bed, a knife in her hand, her face painted for war. "You should have let me die with my father," she whispered, her voice a raw, broken thing. "Are you here to kill me?" he asked. It wasn't a question. He almost welcomed it. "I should," she said, her eyes glittering in the darkness. "You brought us to that place. Your world betrayed us." She took a step closer, the knife point steady. "But you also took bullets that were meant for me. You shielded me. Why?" "Because it was wrong," he said, his voice thick with a guilt that had been eating him alive. "What Mercer did, it was murder. Your father came in peace." He looked at her, at the pain etched into her face. "Because watching him die, it broke something inside me." She studied him for a long, silent moment. "Mercer is hunting my people. He is using this war. He started to wipe us from the earth. The scattered bands, they are being picked off one by one." Her voice dropped, filled with a desperate urgency. "Grey Wolf's brother now leads the warriors. He wants only revenge. He will lead them all to their deaths. But there are others, women, children, old ones, who remember my father's dream of survival." She sheathed her knife. The sound was deafening in the small room. "I am taking them north," she said, "to the grandmother's land, Canada, beyond the reach of the army, beyond Mercer's hate, but I cannot do it alone. I need someone who knows the white man's world, someone who can guide us through it, help us avoid the patrols." She locked her eyes on his. "I need you, Ethan Cole." The request was insane, a betrayal of everything he had ever known. "Your people will kill me on sight. My people are desperate. They will follow me." She took another step closer. "I am not asking you to become Apache. I am not asking you to betray your people. Your people already betrayed you. They betrayed the very idea of honor when they fired on a white flag. I am asking you to choose a different side. Not white, not Apache. The side of survival." He thought of Morrison's last words, of Lydia telling him to find a third path. He looked at Ayoka, at this warrior woman who had lost everything and was still fighting. "When?" he asked. "Tomorrow night. When the moon is dark, meet us at Shepherd's Spring, the place where everything ended. It will be where we begin again." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "My father was a dreamer. He dreamed of peace. He was wrong. Peace is a lie told by conquerors, but survival is a truth we can fight for." She was gone. He was left with an impossible choice: to stay and live a life suffocated by lies, or to go and walk a path that would almost certainly lead to his death. The next night, under a starless sky, Ethan rode out to Shepherd's Spring. The ground was still stained dark where the blood had been spilled. Crosses marked the graves of the soldiers who had died. He waited, his heart pounding, convinced he had made a terrible mistake. Then they appeared, ghosts in the darkness, a small, haggard group of about 50 people, mostly women and children, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion. Ayoka was at their head, her expression grim. "You came," she said, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "I came," he confirmed. And so began their journey, an exodus through a hostile land. They traveled by night, hiding during the day. Ethan's knowledge of the territory and the army's patrol routes was invaluable. He guided them through forgotten canyons and over treacherous mountain passes. Ayoka's warriors, a handful of grim-faced men, scouted ahead, silent and deadly. It was a strange alliance, a white man and a band of Apache fugitives, bound together by a shared enemy and a desperate hope. He saw the suspicion in the eyes of the others. He was the enemy, but he was also their only chance. One night as they rested in a hidden cave, Ayoka came and sat beside him. "Do you regret this?" she asked quietly. "Ask me again if we make it," he said. She was silent for a long time, watching the sleeping forms of her people. "I dream of my father," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He asked me why I am running, why I am not fighting for our land. What do you tell him? I tell him that a people are not the land, she said. A people are the stories they tell their children, the songs they sing. If we all die for the land, the people die with it. But if we live, if we survive, then the Apache survive. She pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. I hope he understands. He would be proud of you, Ethan said. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face in the dim firelight. That first night in the canyon, I told you that you would beg for me. I was wrong. She reached out and her fingers brushed his cheek. The touch was light as a feather, but it sent a shockwave through him. You do not beg. You do not complain. You simply endure. You do what must be done. My father would have liked that about you. Before he could respond, she was gone, leaving him with the warmth of her touch still tingling on his skin. He realized in that moment that he wasn't just guiding them, he was one of them. His old life was a distant dream. This was his reality now. This small, desperate band of survivors was his tribe, and he would see them to safety, or he would die trying. They were 2 weeks from the Canadian border when Mercer found them. A scout came racing back to their hidden camp, his eyes wide with terror. Soldiers, many of them. They are closing in from the south. Mercer. He must have tortured information out of some captured Apache. He had them trapped. Panic erupted. The women gathered their children, their faces pale with fear. The warriors grabbed their weapons, their expressions grim. They were outnumbered 10-1. It was a death trap. We cannot outrun them, Ayoka said, her voice steady, but her eyes filled with despair. This is the end of the path. No, Ethan said. He looked at the canyon walls around them. It was a perfect box canyon. One way in, one way out. It's not over. He grabbed her arm, pulling her aside. Listen to me. Mercer is arrogant. He thinks he has you trapped. He'll come in slow, savoring it. We can use that. He laid out a desperate plan, a gamble that would risk everything. Ayoka listened, her eyes fixed on his. When he was done, she nodded slowly. It is a brave plan, a fool's plan. It's the only plan we have, he said. Then it is the one we will use. They set the trap. The women and children were hidden high up in the caves that dotted the canyon walls. The few warriors, along with Ethan, took up positions behind boulders at the canyon's entrance. They were the bait. Mercer's company rode into the canyon just as Ethan had predicted. Confident, arrogant. He rode at the head, a cruel smile on his face. Ayoka, he bellowed, daughter of a dead chief, come out and face your justice. There is nowhere left to run. That was the signal. From high above, the Apache women began to push. A landslide of rocks and boulders, dislodged by their combined effort, came crashing down, sealing the entrance to the canyon. Mercer and his men were trapped. Chaos. Horses screamed and reared. Soldiers yelled in confusion. Ambush! Mercer roared. Find them! Kill them all! But they were fighting ghosts. Ethan and the warriors fired from their hidden positions, their shots echoing off the canyon walls, making their small number sound like 100. Soldiers fell from their saddles, picked off one by one. Mercer, his face a mask of rage, tried to rally his men, but they were panicked, disorganized. Then from the other end of the canyon, from the caves they thought were empty, came the war cries. The women, armed with knives, clubs, anything they could find, they swarmed down from the heights, a wave of avenging furies. It was a slaughter. Mercer, seeing the battle was lost, tried to flee, but his path was blocked by Ethan. The two men faced each other in the middle of the carnage. Cole! Mercer snarled, drawing his saber. The traitor! I should have hanged you myself. You murdered them in cold blood, Mercer, Ethan said, leveling his rifle. You murdered Hope. There is no hope, Mercer screamed, charging forward. Only victory. A shot rang out, but it wasn't from Ethan's rifle. Mercer stopped, a look of surprise on his face. He looked down at the arrow shaft protruding from his chest. He staggered, then fell to his knees. Ayoka stood on a rock above him, her bow still raised. Her aim had been true. It was over. They left Mercer's men there, disarmed and defeated, to find their own way back to a world that would have to reckon with their leader's crimes. They crossed into Canada 3 days later. They were exhausted, wounded, and they had lost people in the final battle. But they were free. They stood on a hill looking south, back at the land that had been both their home and their prison. "Will you miss it?" Ayoka asked, coming to stand beside him. "Some of it," he said. He looked at her, at the strength and sorrow in her eyes. "I gave up everything to come with you." "You did not give it up," she said softly. "You traded it for something better." She took his hand, her fingers lacing with his. It felt right, like a piece of his soul he hadn't known was missing had just clicked into place. "Together?" he asked, the word full of a future he had never dared to imagine. She smiled, a real smile this time, one that reached her eyes and lit them up from within. "Together," she confirmed. They had lost their land. They had lost their families. But here in this new cold country, under a sky full of unfamiliar stars, they had found something else. Not peace. Peace was too simple a word. They had found survival. And in that survival, they had found each other. They were a new tribe, born of fire and blood and betrayal, a tribe of two worlds with a future they would have to write for themselves, one day at a time. It wasn't the end of a story, it was the beginning of a legend. Thank you for listening to this story of survival and unlikely love. It's incredible how paths can cross and change the course of history, isn't it? I'd love to know what you thought of Ethan and Ayoka's journey. Did he make the right choice? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next trip into the wild, untamed past. Your support helps us keep these stories alive. Until next time, stay curious.